Sound speeds. Welcome back to the Speed Bumps Podcast, episode 11. Now, 11, didn't I commit to 10? Well, if you recall, I said I would see how it goes in the future. So far, people seem to be watching it and getting stuff out of it. And there's some people whose opinion I really respect because I'm close to them, and they've said they've enjoyed it. So I'm going to extend this test just a little bit longer. Now, in fairness, I do not know yet if I'm going to continue. If I do, it's because in these next 3 episodes, which are all I'm committing to at this time, I'm going to see if I could dial in on the technical aspects and make it a little bit better. If you noticed, my angle's a little bit higher. It's actually next to my rearview mirror. It's not low anymore across the car. I'm actually going to see if getting it up closer to my rearview mirror and up, closer to my eye line, I guess you could say, is going to be better, because I don't know if it is. I don't know if it isn't. What I can tell you is that I am not going to see it anymore when I'm looking down below and kind of scanning around. Not that it was like in my field of view or anything obstructing my view. None of that. It's just that now it's up higher and a little bit more so out of my way, so I don't have to really think about it as much. So I'm also changing up the microphone. If you remember, I was using the Octava MK012 with the swivel on it and using technically the extension cable, which is basically a collet. And doing that seemed to be okay. The problem was occasionally it buzzed, it popped, it crinkled. People did notice this and they emailed me about it. I don't know if you noticed this, Alan. They didn't write it in the comments, though, oddly. They would write me messages via email, and actually one person sent me a message through Discord and says, what's going on there? But I'm changing this up a little bit. I'm going to be using a Shure Twinplex today, and that is just hiding right up in here as a plant microphone. I'm going to see if using a Twinplex, if it's going to reduce the amount of overall noise in the car, especially once I dial it in with Clarity VX. I'm not going to be using the Pro. I don't really think I need to use Clarity VX Pro since it was on technically a 90-day loan from Waves. I'm going to be using just the regular Clarity VX, which you can usually get on sale for around $30. So basically, that's what's going on. Camera's right there, and that is the GoPro Hero 4. Now, I'll tell you, I wanted to use the DJI Action 3, and that was my plan. But if you've been following me on social media, like on Twitter, or you have been watching YouTube about the DJI Action 3, you'll notice that there is a big time issue with it. The firmware is fine. It's great that it recharges up to 80% battery life, which is well over an hour on a charge of only about 20 minutes. That's great. The problem is it's out of focus. Now, I could buy a +4 diopter off of Amazon, stick it to the front of the thing and say, cool, now it's in focus again. But I personally am more of a stickler for, if they're going to charge $300 and some odd for something, I want it to be polished. I don't think that they needed to release it on the same day as the GoPro Hero 411 just to say, oh, look, this is our competition to that, so buy ours instead. It obviously is not ready at the time of this video. There's a lot of people that are releasing videos saying that the Action 3 is soft focus. Now, you could say, why don't you go back to the Pocket 2? The problem was with the Pocket 2, sure, the image was great, but it's a 3 gimbal camera, and no matter what I set it to, if I set it to horizon, if I set it to follow, if I set it to FPV, it was all over the place. I made a turn and the thing would go all over the place. Now, you may say, why don't you use the ZV-1? Oh no, Coffee even mentioned that in one of the comments. I very well could, and I will most likely try that at some point in the future. But the thing is, the GoPro, I think, is going to give me a smaller file size. So I'm going to try that because these could end up rolling for a while. And if they do, I want to make sure that I have enough power to sustain the entire video. Now, I'm not using the Wise because technically it should not be a big deal lighting wise on the drive home. I was released today at about just before 6 p.m. and I'm driving right now through the streets of Atlanta. So if you notice, it's not blurred. But that's because I could be going anywhere at this time. As soon as we come back from the question that is being asked in this episode, I'm going to start blurring the background, because by that point, I will most likely not be in this area of town anymore. And hey, I don't want you to see where I'm going and what I'm doing and stuff. But regardless, let's go ahead and stop wasting time. This was a long introduction. And let's get right on to the question. One topic that would be great if you could discuss would be the sound mixer's job, but technical part of it, maybe an interview or your personal experience. For example, I personally studied sound engineering and at university showed us very basic things of sound mix, boom operator, and sound utility. For example, sound mixer in live TV shows the mixer adjusts the levels live on the mixer, in film adjusts before each take, and leave it there until each take finishes to prevent noise floor changes levels. Also told us limiters it's up to the mixer if we'll use, but in live TV shows always use. In film, some of them, if the recording device have dual channels, use one at the levels they believe are good and the dual channel at lower levels. But what if there is no dual channel on the mixer? Should we use the limiter in case the talent screams unexpectedly in the same take that is whispering? So what exactly does a production sound mixer do? Well, if you could figure that out, I'd love to know. No, I'm kidding, obviously. A sound mixer's job is very important. And not just because they interact with everybody while the boom operator and the sound utility are working, but I will tell you that's a nice plus too, because they learn a lot of really good jokes. Like, for example, did you hear the one about the sound mixer that died at Warner Brothers Studios? Yeah, it was terrible. Security had to wake up 24 sound mixers before they found the one that died. Now, that is obviously a joke. A sound mixer's job is a lot more important than just learning jokes to tell the crew, even though I tell you, that is very important. One of the big jobs that a sound mixer is responsible for is hiring the very best team possible. Now, I know we're not really getting into the responsibilities just yet, but we'll get there, trust me. Finding a boom operator that's going to work within your technical standards and specifications that can handle themselves the way you want them to on set, that's not going to drive people crazy, that's someone that you will not be driven crazy with as a sound mixer all day long. A sound utility that's a go-getter, that's able to second boom when necessary, put out wireless microphones, that anticipates doing all the jobs of a sound utility, you know, from paperwork to, you know, what have you, tolerating the sound mixer. There's a lot of different things that are responsibilities that a sound mixer falls into, and part of that's also dependent on what type of show it is. If it's, for example, an ENG type show or reality show, then a sound mixer is going to be a one-man band most likely. They might have an A2 assistant, but more than likely they're going to be carrying a sound recorder on their chest with all the transmitters and on them, and they're going to be recording right there. They're going to distribute context, they're going to apply wires, and if they need to boom anything, they're going to be throwing out the boom and doing that themselves in addition to everything else they're doing. Most of the time it's multi-tracking and letting post figure it out later. That's basically what the job has fallen into now, because they're not actually really mixing anymore, they're just managing data. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of the sound mixer job is entailing right now, is managing data. That's not to say that what they do doesn't require skill. It definitely does require skill to be a sound mixer. But unfortunately, a lot of the art is being taken out of the world of film in general. A lot of shots are more about getting the camera move right than the performance. If you're talking about television, in many cases, they're just trying to get the certain shot done. Okay, the actors did a good job. Cool. Let's do. The shot wasn't right. Let's do it again. Actors have to start hitting it every single time until they get the camera move right. Unfortunately, that's a reality that us in the sound world also have to deal with, because we have to nail it every single time, because when camera finally gets it right and the actors are good with their performance and the director is good with their performance, then we're ready to move on. So a sound mixer has to get a team that's going to nail it every single time. But if we're talking about television, a sound mixer does not get to go on tech scouts, is not part of a creative process on an ongoing basis. Basically, once they get going on the show, they're checking emails, they're interacting, finding out what information they possibly can from people that bring them information, like producers, UPMs, and whoever. But if you're talking about a feature, obviously that's where Academy Awards come from, because those sound mixers will get taken on tech scouts all the time. They'll get a chance to see all the different locations and interact and say, okay, this is where the carts are going to be. Oh, this is how we should do this and that, and this is where we should be wiring in, sewing in certain lavs into certain wardrobe. If there's a superhero show, we're going to be talking about how to hide the lavs in that. If there's any kind of a meetings that need to happen with regards to making sure that like perhaps a lav could be exposed the whole entire time, be sitting on someone's chest, and they'll say, well, we'll just smudge it out in post. It's no big deal. on a big budget show, a lot of the times you can get away with that kind of stuff. I've been on big budget shows before, and they're like, we're not concerned with the boom. Put it wherever you want to, even if it's in the shot. And I'm like, really? And they're like, yeah, just don't have your body cross an actor and you're good. I'm like, okay, well, that's cool. But that doesn't always happen on shows. But I'm also not talking about what a sound mixer does. The job of a sound mixer has changed even over the course of the past few years. We have an ambulance coming in, so I'm going to pause right now. Hold for the environment, the location. So in feature world, sound mixers are very much involved in the creative process. They're taken on tech scouts. Their opinions are listened to when it comes down to how to deal with certain sounds and locations. And they have quite a bit of a say in how things are done from a pre-production and prep point of view. But when you're talking about sound mixers in the world of television, it's more about just getting through the day. There are usually in this day and age, there's alternating DPs. So you'll have one episode or a block of episodes, like 1 or 2 episodes, sometimes more, that are done by one director and one director of photography and a first AD as well. So they'll alternate, like director 1 will work with first AD 1 and DP 1, while director 2 and DP 2 and first AD 2 are in prep. Then once the block 1 is done, they'll basically alternate and the second team is up. Then the first assistant director and DP will go work with director number 3 and so forth. They'll start flip-flopping episodes. But while they are in prep, they're going to locations. They're scouting. They're saying, oh, well, if we're going to be here, we should be here at this time of day so that way we can see the sun in this area over as opposed to this area. And they start talking about lighting and how it's going to be and what angles are going to choose and that kind of thing. That's all part of prep. Sound mixer's not involved in that. I jokingly tell people it's because they don't want someone that comes along and tells them no to everything. No, I'm sorry, you can't shoot at this location because it's right next to the interstate. I don't care how pretty it is, or something along those lines. But truth be known, what the sound team does as a whole is very important. It's it requires a lot of skill. And if a sound mixer is involved on that, I have been on shows before where a sound mixer says, I would like to send out someone. If you're going to do a day of tech scouting, then they've negotiated for an 8 and skate of someone to come out and join the tech scout crew to scout ahead on it for the sound team. And I have been part of teams that are able to negotiate that in television, and I strongly recommend doing that if it is something you can do. The reason it is important is because when we get there on the day, there's so many times they say, oh, well, why didn't you tell us this in advance? We could have actually, coordinated, or we could have made this happen. Well, we weren't there part of the tech scout. This is the first time we're seeing it. And they're like, oh, I see what you mean. Part of it might be in a restaurant. They'll book a restaurant and not think about the fact that we're going to want to unplug everything. And then we get there and they're like, oh, no, we can't, there's no way that we can get all the refrigerators shut off because there's product in there. If we would have known in advance, well, how do we supposed to know that? I thought that we were just, showing up on the day and having to deal with it, see what you can do. And then they'll say, well, there's nothing we can do. Well, obviously these are worst case scenarios, but scenarios that I've run into nonetheless. But with regards to the actual responsibilities on the day of a sound department, of a sound mixer rather, let's talk about the actual what they are doing. With regards to sound, in the digital world, it's different than it was in the analog world. For example, sound mixer had to know that you basically, 0 dB back on a dBu analog meter is like not very loud, even though it would be clipping like crazy on a dBFS meter. You have to basically mix pretty hot, mix plus 8, plus 10, mix that up a little bit, push above 0 dB because you want to have the microphones picking up a good solid level. Back in the world of analog tape, that's what you had to have. Otherwise, it wouldn't sound right. And there is a difference between having a microphone that's really, really hot and being pushed up pretty loud over 0 dB and one that is a lot lower. Keep in mind, in the world of analog, noise floors are a big concern. And since, in the analog world, you would have an analog mixer that would basically have a clean preamp that would pick up a microphone, but then you're recording on analog tape. So everything in the signal flow was going to be analog. There was no digital. And then when you recorded to tape, even if it was DAT, that's when things started turning more digital. You still had to manage that. And it still had to be, if there was a crinkle in it or something along those lines in the tape, that could affect your sound. And so you had to manage it properly. In the world of digital, things changed a little bit. It became less about perfecting a mix because and I'm not trying to poke at any sound mixers or anything like that. You could watch the in the 2021, the Atlanta Audio Engineering Society did a live stream, and I was one of the guests on there. And one of the very first things that was said by some of the sound mixers in there was that the sound mixer as a job is probably less critical than the boom operator, because even some sound mixers that I've watched interviews with in the past have said, look, I mean, if you only have money to hire one person, hire yourself a good boom operator, because if the microphone isn't placed right, what in the world am I going to do except record it? I mean, there's a lot that can be said for that. And unfortunately, in the world of digital workflows, a lot of the post guys I've talked to will actually remix sounds. They'll actually remix mix tracks, because they are not always, they're going to be perfectly fine running a process over it, but they can also very quickly have their team prep the tracks, scrub them clean, do whatever they need to, so that way the mixer just gets in there and says, okay, well, I'm going to mix this in, and everything is clean and level to where they want it to be, and they don't have to do nearly as much because it's already been prepped for them. And there are many post sound mixers that I've worked with that say, I would prefer to actually do the mix myself, even though in former years, back in the world of analog, where you basically had a boom operator and then the sound mixer was trying to mix in different lavs on the fly, and they were quite literally trying to mix the track that you were going to hear in the movie, because there was no isotope, there was no digital manipulation of tracks. You had to get room tone, because that had to be mixed in between the gaps in order to make seamless edits. And unfortunately, the world of digital has changed quite a bit, and it doesn't always make it the best from an artistic perspective. There are many mixers I've worked with now that just don't know how to mix. They just toss faders. They don't know how to do it. They've simply just bought gear, and they're just riding the clock out until retirement. Some mixers have completely just shut off. And again, I'm not going to name names. I'm just telling you that sometimes sound mixers just don't care anymore. There are some sound mixers though that I have even told that you gotta still step up your game, because if you don't, there is a very big possibility that at some point in time, as internet connections get faster and things turn more and more internet based, a sound mixer could be one of those jobs they start outsourcing. Or they may end up saying, well, we're just going to have a central recorder someplace that hits record and multi-track through the internet, and we'll have the team that's on the floor actually doing the work. I hate to say it, that is something someone probably will try at some point in time, and if they establish a workflow that works for their show, they're going to write some article about it and producers are going to jump on board. That's not to say that it's happening anytime soon. That's not to say that sound mixing is not an important position, because part of what the sound mixer is even still responsible for today is making sure that the decisions are made with regards to the mixing for the director to hear. So if there is a wide shot and a boom can't get in there, sound mixer has to make the determination to let them hear the wireless microphones or a plant microphone as needed. The director has to understand how the flow of the show will sound as well as look. So they need to be able to see this and hear this. But the mix track is one of the most primary jobs of a sound mixer this day and age in the digital world. Again, I'm not saying that the mix track is never used. I've worked on many shows, especially television shows, where they say, all we did is scrubbed up the mix track a little bit, put some music over it, and that was it. That's all we had time to do. And that is a very big thing that has happened in the past. More than likely, it's going to turn into one of those things where they're going to establish more and more workflows where it's going to be quicker for them to just scrub the tracks real quickly and clean, and then just have somebody mix it together. I mean, especially with things like Dugan Auto Mix now, the actual auto mix process is very, very streamlined, and there's a lot of auto mixes that are engaged sometimes on big character counts to make sure that you get a good solid mix track. Because otherwise, if a director is watching the show, watching the monitors, and they suddenly don't hear an actor come in there, they're going to say, "Did we get that line?" And they're concerned, and the mixer's like, "Yeah, of course we got it. I just didn't bring it in there." So some mixers on bigger show counts will engage something like an auto mix. But that's not to say that a mixer doesn't know how to mix. It's just that sometimes they'll do it as like a safety net, kind of like using a lav mic as a safety net. Or sometimes a boom operator will, instead of playing one person that's on camera, will play a little bit farther away to get multiple people and to swing faster. There's a lot of different tricks that we'll use in the sound department world. Now, you mentioned also about limiters, and I guess there's like effects processing in live sound. That is not normally something that will happen in the production sound world, at least with regards to isolated tracks. ISOs will come in from a boom, from a lav, or from a plant, and they will be recorded the way they are without any equalization or something like that as a rule. Some mixers will play with that, even though I'm not normally an advocate for that. Mixers that I've most likely seen them trying to play with EQ or something along those lines, what they will do is they'll tweak it for their mix track. And that way it sounds a little bit better in what they're hearing and what their director and script supervisor, producers, or everybody are hearing. Now, some mixers will also provide, like they'll use something like Cedar DNS, which will be noise reduction. Personally, I'm not a big advocate for on-the-fly processing and that being delivered to people like producers or directors, especially the first AD, because then they'll hear sounds and they'll say, oh, this isn't a big deal then. Oh, we don't need to be concerned about it. Even though there are some sounds that we're like, no, we need to shut that down. We need to shut that down. We need to shut that down. Well, how big of a deal is it? Let's just cancel it out. You know, bring up your little box and let's see if it'll cancel out. Cool. We don't have to worry about it. Let's go. I don't know how many times I've been on shows and they're like, oh, Post isn't concerned about the air conditioning. They told us. Or they'll say, let's record an air conditioner test. And then they'll say 2 hours later, Post listened to that and it's not going to be a big deal for him. So then we have to listen to the air conditioner or the heating system the entire time we're on the stage. But, you know, unfortunately, tools have gotten extremely powerful. Isotope is one of the biggest ones, even though Waves has a lot of really amazing plugins too. Some of the plugins that we can do will do phenomenally even on something like this podcast. If we don't want to hear the car noise at all in the car, like we did on a couple of the early episodes of the Speed Bumps podcast, we can knock that down. If I were to add music or add a smooth layer of something in the background, I could add in my own car noise. I didn't for the podcast, but I could, and it would clean up quite a bit of the tracks. But sound mixers, as a rule, will not want to use something like Cedar DNS and deliver that to the director and producers and stuff, because they don't want them to assume that what we're trying to get with regards to shutting down all the noise is a big deal. They may include it and just kind of slip it into the track to give Post an idea of something that could happen, or maybe for the dailies. The dailies being that what they'll do is they'll synchronize picture and sound together, and they will put that out. And usually it'll be like on an online system, so that way the DP, the director, or people who have the permissions can listen to it and look at everything and make decisions on how the show's going. It gives them an idea of how their work is on the fly. It used to be that before you started off your day, you'd go to breakfast, then you'd watch the dailies together as a crew, and you'd see what you shot the previous day. That way you could get an idea of how things looked in sound and what would be the problems that you would need to work out going forward. In the digital world, you don't have to do that nearly as much, especially with so much dynamic range on microphones and cameras and everything like that. They can do a lot of digital manipulation, and of course you can still smudge out things. You can still use VFX if you want to. And a lot of the creativity from talking to DPs are like, you know, they'll get so frustrated because all of a sudden a TV show that they worked on was bought by another network, and they'll run an HDR pass on it, not allow them to actually recolor time and correct everything. And they're just like, oh, they're just going to HDR pass it and put it out. And they're frustrated because they spend a lot of time working on certain lighting and camera effects and stuff like that, and it doesn't look good to them. Just like in many cases, by the time our sound gets on television, it's heavily processed. The compression is really awkward. You'll sometimes not even hear things that were processed out completely. It sounds really weird sometimes. But with regards to processes that a sound mixer does, as a rule, what they're going to be doing on the fly, they will use a limiter, even though some mixers don't. Some mixers don't want to have the limiter because they don't want it. They would rather have a track record consistently, and if they're worried about a sound being too loud, what they'll do is they might turn on a limiter if they want to. They might turn it on just a particular microphone, but they won't actually mix with a limiter in the mix track. They will also perhaps use it's not really compression. They won't really use compression, but they will sometimes use auto mixes. They'll sometimes push it a little bit hotter than they want to, so that way they bounce off of a limiter if they're trying to make a certain point. They'll sometimes use their mix track to tell a story. So, I mean, that's the whole goal of what they're trying to do, is tell the story of the dialogue and everything like that to actually for the show. So sometimes I've known sound mixers that will get really frustrated if they hear a certain sound that they want shut off, and they'll want us to place a microphone on a noisy source so they can bring it up to drive home the point that that sounds even noisier. Some sound mixers will get very angry and they'll do that kind of thing. That's not to say that's part of their job. Sound mixer's job is basically to record and get the very best tracks for the show. Sometimes you have to play a game in order to get the very best tracks on the show. Sound mixers, though, in the digital modern era, still have the same responsibility with regards to getting the cleanest, lowest noise possible tracks, and to make decisions that will drive home that point and decision more so than probably, because that's their primary responsibility. Sure, the boom operator and sound utility are on board with that as well, but you got to keep in mind, it still falls on the shoulders of the sound mixer. If the tracks aren't good, they'll replace the sound mixer, and usually if you replace the sound mixer, their team will go with them. I've been on shows before where the sound mixer I've worked with was fired, and then they hired another sound mixer, and the sound mixer says, I got to use my team. I've also been part of teams that have come aboard with the sound mixer who has been replacing another sound mixer. When they fired that mixer, they said, well, we'd like you to continue to use our team. And the sound mixer that I was working with said, no, you're going to use I'm going to use my team. These are my guys. And all of a sudden they say, okay, well, they're gone too. So you're casually lost in the war, as I put it. One time when I was fired, not because of performance, but because my sound mixer was fired due to, I'll leave that out of it. But the actual role of a sound mixer is to record a mix track as cleanly as possible. Now, I've joked, I've given some a lot of beat around the bush, information there. I've gone off on many tangents, as of course I do. But when it comes down to it, the role of the sound mixer is to get the highest signal to the lowest possible noise, and to get all the production dialogue as cleanly as possible for post to do with as they please. They may choose in the digital world to run straight with the mix track and just run a little bit of process over it, add a little bit of music, and then run with it. They might also say, you know what, I would prefer, the mixer may say, I would prefer to have my team scrub the tracks and prepare everything. That way I have everything done and I just sit there and mix the show when I have my few hours of time to mix the show. But what have you. The sound mixer, though, will usually make sure that the isolated tracks are as clean as possible and as low a noise as possible. They'll make sure everything is gain staged correctly, which means that every single point down the line, at the transmitter, at the receiver, at the audio mixer, all the different levels where you can adjust a level, an audio level, is adjusted correctly and appropriately. They'll make sure that is done. They'll make sure that decisions are made, like, oh, this live sounds a little bit crinkly, you need to go in there and fix that. Or they'll say, that sounded a little bit off mic, you need to, the boom operator needs to change up something. And they'll say, it didn't sound good, you need to get the microphone on. Or they'll quickly say, oh, they just quickly widened out, you need to take the boom up. Or they'll say, you need to, they're now including this other person, swing over there and grab them too. They'll sometimes tell you that kind of thing on the fly, because camera will ever change, and they'll constantly adjusting and making something different, making changes that will drive the way that the show looks differently, and the sound mixer on the fly will have to direct their team to get the tracks of someone, of whoever is on camera, so that way that you have everybody appropriately. And that is, in a nutshell, what the sound mixer is, their job entails, and their responsibilities. Even though I could say, with joking aside, I'm not actually bitter towards them at all. It's just that a lot of times sound mixers, being a department head, gets preferential treatment in many ways when their teams are not. For example, if you travel on a show, sound mixers will often get certain they'll get better hotels. They might get an actual car that their teams won't be able to, they're not going to be supplied a car. You might get a first class ticket. while the boom operator and utility won't be. There might be preferential treatment because they're a department head. They'll hire an out-of-town department head without blinking an eye on some shows, and they'll say, well, find locals for boom operator and sound utility, and they come into town and try to figure out who the best team is that they can get. But just like the rest of the film industry, department heads are bowed to. And so in many ways, the sound mixer is too, from production perspective, which leaves people like us, boom operator and utility, having to fend for ourselves, which is why having a sound mixer that goes to bat for us is very, very important. And we really love sound mixers that will do that, as well as sound mixers that will have our backs when we go to negotiate our rate, and that will help us negotiate, help us whenever needed on that kind of thing. So that's also part of being a good sound mixer too, is making sure that your team is well taken care of, because they're the ones that make you look and sound good. For the pro sound topic I'm going to discuss in this episode is grumpy sound people. Are we all grumpy? Well, I'll tell you this, no, we're not. What we are usually is pretty passionate and very determined to get very good sound. But it can come across as us being grumpy quite often. And the reason is because the film industry is a very visual medium. If you want it to be about sound, go into radio. Do something that involves just sound only, or something like, work on the Howard Stern show where cameras are part of it, but it's all still about the radio show itself. But sound people, it's very easy to think that we're just being grumpy, and part of it is because we are the only people that care about sound on a set, and the other 100 crew members are there for picture. Now, granted, we are all symbiotic, and part of what we do as boom operators, utilities, and sound mixers is build connections and really work with other departments to try to come up with the very best possible tracks we can. Because as you've heard me say in the past, every other department there can survive without us. But we need every other department to cooperate with us for us to get the very best possible tracks. Even if it means that when we roll, they're quiet. Because there are some people that just will be noisy on set. They're going to walk over to Crafty, start opening up cans of stuff. They're going to grind salt and pepper and whatever. It's going to drive us completely batty because they just will not quiet down. On the show that I'm currently on right now, construction is constantly walking through the stages that we're on because they just do not care. They're not part of that creative on-set process, and they're constantly walking through, which drives us nuts. And it drives the actors nuts too, because they're in the middle of a performance and they're like, are you kidding me? What is that noise? Quite literally, there was a table saw that turned on in the middle of a scene today, which was a fairly emotional scene. And the actors are like, are you kidding me? Where is that table saw? Why are we listening to a saw in the middle of this? Unfortunately, it does happen though. And that kind of thing can make a sound department really, really grumpy, because the camera world, if it's not right, they'll tweak the camera. They'll make sure there's something right before they roll. If the lighting isn't right, they'll say, okay, well, let's bring out a flag. Let's make sure the lighting is right. You have all the time in the world to get it right, and then we roll. But the sound world, we can be on the ball. We can shut down noises. We can do everything we possibly can. But then when we roll, that's when things finally get quiet, and that's when we suddenly hear things that we did not know were there. Or crew members that are now idle aren't going to be paying attention. There's a show I worked on earlier this year where there was constantly a condor over set, and there was one of the set electricians that was monitoring a light up there. He had headphones on and he was not paying attention, realizing that the game system he was playing, because he was listening to music, the game system that he was playing had sound turned on. And so we'd be listening to music, and we're like, where's that music coming from? Came to be that it was coming from an electrician that was playing a game, but he couldn't hear the game because he was in the middle of playing the game and he wasn't tuned into his phone. So that is something that I got pretty grumpy about, because I take my sound very seriously. And if I'm going to be, working really hard on set to get my microphone in the proper place at the right time, all I want is a little consideration towards the actor's performance and the dialogue, so that way I can put a microphone on them and appropriately boom who I'm supposed to be. It really is frustrating when your sound or your job performance is based off of factors that are outside. That's one of the reasons why we get a little bit grumpy at times. Because imagine this. Your job is completely riding on other people and their ability to how they affect your job. If the director and the locations department chooses a very noisy location, we're stuck. We're stuck listening to this. We're stuck trying to mix in and trying to figure things out as well as we possibly can. What do we play here? The lavs. We use more narrow pattern microphones. How do we do this? And the director may say, look, I'm not concerned with this. I'm here for the picture. We'll just figure it out. We'll ADR the scene. That's not what any sound person wants to hear. That will make us grumpy because they're like, you know what? That's fine. All right, fine. We'll wash our hands with it. If you're not concerned with it, why should we be too? But in the back of our minds, we still wish it were better because we still have to listen to it. And there have been times I've been on set and I will hear people say, we're not concerned about this. We're just trying to make our day. There was this Fast and Furious movie that I did where they dropped a bus off the top of a cliff. And we finished all the other scenes that we were doing with talent earlier that day. And they said, yeah, let's keep sound around for this dropping the bus off the top of the cliff. And we're like, oh, cool, that's going to be really fun. So we sat around there for literally 7 hours. And at the end of the day, when the sun finally cleared the entire rock quarry that we were shooting in, and everything was even light, they said, okay, let's roll. And we're like, great, finally we're going to be getting our sound. And then we're like, wait a minute, what is that sound? Come to find out there was a helicopter that they mounted cameras to and that they were operating cameras from. So all we ended up getting was a little bit of crashing, but a lot of helicopter. We stayed around for 7 hours to get that. And so, yeah, that made us a bit on the grumpy side because we're like, are you kidding me? Even cameras this day and age, Red cameras are god-awful at their fans. They still have not figured out fans. They have had cameras out for well over 10 years at this time, but they will not fix their fans. Just like now that we have, we no longer have these big fixed feature, the big lighting instruments like PAR cans and not ERSs, they call them Source 4s now, things like that. Silicon lights, all these different lights that were used in the old era of film and in the early days of digital, which were very, very high powered lights, made the set extremely hot. But they rang a lot. They made a lot of noise. Now we have LED lights, and those put out, they require an entire camera, or not a camera, but they require an entire Wi-Fi network to operate. And sometimes those frequencies can interfere with some of the things that we do. More than likely, it's not going to interfere with our wireless channels because we usually use UHF on set, but what it can interfere with is our microphones. And it can also affect noise a little bit. It will sometimes also clutter up the spectrum. Sorry, I got to change lanes. Let's go ahead and change lanes again. Let's have fun. So when it comes down to it, a lot of what we deal with in the sound world is not up to our skill level. We can make a set quiet. If we go on a tech scout, we can get it quiet. That's not a problem at all. The biggest issue we run into is that we will get a set completely quiet, and then they'll order a light to come in on set, and they'll all of a sudden start ringing, and we're like, can you take the ballast off set? That's something we ran into a whole lot of times, that you have these high power lights that will have different modes on it. You do have a silent mode, but it still makes noise, and it basically sends more noise over to the ballast. Like a fluorescent light bulb will have a ballast on there that you sometimes would hear a buzz. If you go into a doctor's office or someplace, you'll hear a buzz from a light. A lot of that's a ballast. A lot of times that's a ballast, not functioning correctly. Or sometimes it is a light itself. But what we will normally run into is outside forces we cannot control. DP needs a certain light. Sometimes the operators or the DP will be talking through the entire scene. And we're like, can the person stop talking through this? Actors need to be able to perform. Well, actors are going to have to deal with it because the director has to direct and talk and back to one, do this now, say this line. And I'm like, driven crazy by it. Sometimes the first AD, sometimes there's crew members making noise. Sometimes the DP is talking nonstop through the scene, or the operators are constantly talking on their headsets to someone else, or they're talking back. They're doing a remote. they have a remote head and they're operating offset, talking to their dolly grip. The dolly grip will be saying, "Yes, I'm kind of in a wall. I need to push on through." But they're going to be talking to the operator during the middle of the take. And unfortunately, that's something we have to deal with because they're trying to get their shot right. Remember, it's a visual medium. You say you watch a movie, you watch a TV show. You don't say you listen to it. What you do there is you have to be respectful of the visual, but that means sacrificing, or perhaps sacrificing unless we have any kind of prep and we can prepare for things, or they'll be more than happy to work with us. But still, we sometimes will have major challenges getting set quiet, not because of anything that we're doing wrong, but because everyone else is noisy. or maybe the environment is. That's the reason why sometimes sound people are grumpy. Now, if you've watched this channel for a while and you've seen any of my reaction videos, one of the reasons why I will sometimes get frustrated is because I work a lot on set to try to get the very best sound possible. I do a lot of videos here on SoundSpeeds. At the time of this video, I have over 400 videos, which total over 8 days worth of content. And I've spent a lot of time, sacrificed sleep, sacrificed many, many hours to try to teach things. And then I see other people online that don't teach properly. Now, granted, I'm not one of these, I'm not like a perfect being or something like that. But when I see channels that will play the algorithm, that will simply, that don't bother doing research, and those channels blow up because they happen to play the YouTube game correctly, and then they misinform, that's something I'll get pretty irritated with. And that's when you'll see me and the grumpiness come out, because I'm very passionate about sound. That's part of me being who I am. When I was a professional photographer, I taught photography, and I was a big stickler about making sure that things were done right. When I was a martial arts instructor, I was very, very about the people that were involved in working with them to make sure they felt better about themselves, and they were doing their kicks and punches correctly, and I would tweak with them and work with them. I've been very, very clear about my passions and my teachings over the course of time. And that's one of the reasons why if I ever come across grumpy whenever I do a video here on SoundSpeeds, part of that's because I see it being mistaught. And not necessarily from a perspective of, well, this is the way. You must do it my way or the highway, or you're doing it wrong. But part of what it also is there are multiple ways of sometimes doing something, but there is only one best way. And sometimes, like, for example, my cable wrangling video, to me it was very important that be taught correctly, because I'm so tired of talking to people that are supposedly pros that miswrap cable. And that drives me completely insane. And that will throw me off when I'm on a film set trying to make my day, trying to get through my day, and suddenly I run into all these different issues with, I'll pick up a cable and I'm quickly trying to reroute it because we're about to run and the sound utility is doing something else, tweaking a wire or something, and I suddenly have to deal with a bunch of spaghetti because someone didn't wrap a cable correctly. That to me is a very big deal. And that's one of the reasons why I get very passionate about some things, and I can come across very, very grumpy at times when I'm doing videos or in general. But that's one of the reasons why sound people can come across as grumpy. It's partially because we are very passionate about what we do, and all of our hard work can go completely out the window by stuff that's out of our control. Or perhaps it's something that is a completely outside factor, like people that just will read an article and then decide to teach something, and they won't know what they're talking about because they have no experience behind it. That's one of the things that will also sometimes frustrate me personally when I see videos on YouTube. So there you have it, episode 11 of the Speed Bumps podcast. And I've been talking quite a bit today, and I apologize about that. It was a long first episode back. But then, is this going to be back, or is this going to be the first of only 3 episodes? Still kind of dialing in on the world of this podcast. Hopefully we're going to figure it all out, and we'll determine whether or not it's going to be feasible to go forward. And if people are still getting anything out of it, we'll see. That's what I'm going to leave. That's how I'm going to leave it as. We'll see. Now, one thing I am going to say, and I leave this at, for the first 10 episodes of this podcast, I had guests doing the outro. You heard Badger Scott, you heard Mike Delgadio, you heard Curtis Judd. You didn't hear me. But what you did hear is them. And I'm out of people to record the outro. So if you would like to record the outro, look down in the description and follow that script roughly. What I'm looking for is about 24 seconds as a rule. But if you'd like to add something silly, something funny, you want to poke at me, you want to do whatever else, by all means, I welcome you to do that. But follow the technical specifications down below and follow the script. But make it fun, make it yours, but just don't be like 3 minutes long. It's supposed to be around 24 seconds. If you can get it within 24 seconds, wonderful. But if it's not, I may not use it if it's not funny, if it's not informative, if you don't cover all the bases. I'm going to work with you, work with me here a bit. Don't just make it an insult fest, insulting everybody. Otherwise, obviously, it won't make it. But regardless, thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning into this episode 11 of the Speed Bumps podcast. And I'll see you in episode 12. If you'd like to ask a sound-related question to be answered in a future episode, send text, audio, or video to ssp@soundspeed.us. Want to record this outro? Details in the description below. Find us on social media and online at www.soundspeed.us. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more sound-related content.